Thank you all for being here this afternoon.
Welcome.
Ruth, I'm going to plunge right in because we have a formidable and terrifying clock right in front of us. Could I draw you out on this new book, Watershed, which you've just published, and to maybe open up this conversation by talking about how you feel about the responsibility of the poet at a time of such public urgencies as the climate crisis and how it affects all of us.
Yes, well, thank you, Ranjit. I mean, that's a huge question. And it's been so clear for so long that the world is heading into disintegration. And your new book is a sort of vision of disintegration, really. And I've been thinking for a long time, what's the responsibility of a poet to address the mood about it? What do? We can't just do elegy. A lot of people are writing nature poems, which are now called eco-poems, which are quite strident in their protest. They're right to protest, they're right, but we have to go beyond that. We have a responsibility, I guess, to poetry itself, which is to write the best poem we can in the circumstances to address the profound and important things that are going on. And at the moment we are in an era of meltdown and disintegration. So we just can't say, alas. And one of the things I admire about your work, and is particularly this new book, Ice-Light, is how you manage to find epiphanies in witnessing to this without wringing your hands, without flagellating us, but still witnessing. How do you do that?
I think this has something to do with trying to find that voice in which to bear witness and recognizing that it cannot be the individual solitary voice. I think, to me, over the last 10 years or longer, that's been a key crisis of working with the form of the short poem, the lyric poem. We know this, at least in the English tradition of the English lyric, it's been weighted in favor of a certain personal I with its anguish and its anxieties and its joys. But the result of that, one result of that, is that you could also descend into self-indulgence and your particular traumas and so on. But I think the nature of the world and the world of nature today is such that our lives are intertwined with the lives of many, many other people and members of other species. And the responsibility of writing a poem today also means that it has to include those voices in some way.
Yes, indeed. I mean, this little, it's a pamphlet really, not a book. It's done by a press in England, which is Eco Press. The woman makes them on her kitchen table. She sources people who print ink, which is ecologically secure, whose paper is ecologically secure. She does it without any fanfare on the back, not what this book is about or who praises it or anything like that. You just get the poems and the paper and the painting, the cover. And I concentrated on water because one of the scandals, the ecological scandals of our time in Britain, is that ever since Margaret Thatcher sold off the water companies of Britain, which is not something that other countries have mainly done, thank goodness. I mean, it's like selling off the psyche, in a way, because everybody had, before then, water was something to which everybody and every landscape had a right. And I think in some places, rivers have been now given the status of personhood. Yeah. Wasn't the Ganges up for personhood? But I think your Supreme Court turned it down.
No, I think one of the problems with that High Court judgment in Uttarakhand, which attempted to offer personhood to a river, is that it moved one step up and deified the river. So that falls into another kind of legal fiction in India where deities are seen to have legal personhood. So I'm somehow not sure that worked out. I think there are examples in South America where this has been done with more success.
Yes.
In India, that kind of step falls into another problem, which is people go on polluting the river whilst symbolically and theoretically worshipping it. So that's not been very helpful. But I think it points a way forward. And I think it also asks us to consider the rights of other beings who we might regard as inanimate, and to recognize that they too have rights. So so the larger ethical and political question would be, how do you form a solidarity across not only species, but forms of being? And I think for us here, as you were saying, in the post-Thatcherite dispensation, what that has meant, resources of water, in fact, the language itself, we talk of resources, but nature exists apart from us.
I thought I might read a poem I called Lady of the Lake, because one of the ways of enriching what you're saying about the land, about nature, is to go to mythology. And in our mythology, the Arthurian mythology is, of course, very important. And I'm sure you all know the sword in the stone, where the hand that holds the sword, Excalibur, which King Arthur receives. So this poem is called The Lady of the Lake, and it's my most strident poem in the book. It's the most protesting poem. But I'm also thinking about the future, about children. My daughter, and if she has children, what would she say? How will they grow up knowing that they are living in a world that we have damaged irrevocably? Yeah. Lady of the Lake, and the translucent sperm of microplastics in rain, in our food, in every human placenta. Probably the placentas of water voles too, swimming towards their breakfast of floating flowers, as if the divided fishtail of Melusine waved at the weir below the factory and smothered the whole surface in froth, islands and pinnacles shredding away from their own crests, glimmering like net trim on a ball gown, gossamer breaking to quicksilver, and a white hand thrust up through the whole mess, offering a sword and a tambourine to every river in Arthurian England, bubbling with iridescent chemicals, prescription drugs, and raw sewage released into the veins of every current 400,000 times a year. Everything we need to think about and don't. The Atlantic jet stream speeding up, Australia, Spain, California on fire, and children all over the globe injected with a blast of climate terror, climate guilt, straight into the hippocampus, as if a pub in that crystal cave at the end of the world held a darts match for the blind. And the boards were our bodies, our hearts.
The poems haunted me ever since I got Watershed, because on the one hand it draws on, very ironically, on the whole Tennysonian treatment of Morte d'Arthur and the white hand clad in samite, the once and future king.
Wonderful.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then you come at it with a consciousness that is very, very strongly immersed also in empirical data. And this, to me, is fascinating about how we are increasingly working as poets concerned with this across the humanities, which is more or less our traditional abode, and the sciences. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how that has played out for you.
Yes, well, it's actually one of the things I admire about what you do. I mean, in the old days, in every poetic tradition, the poet knew the same sorts of things as their audience. And so they could allude to them, and it would be easy. It would be a shared body of reference. For instance, in the English language tradition in Britain, Tennyson, who you mentioned, could just refer to Greek mythology because it was part of every educated person's bank of knowledge. These days, that's out of the window, and also it's a problem for, for poets in Britain. If you refer to Greek mythology, you're either showing off or you're doing something arcane that other people don't understand, and that's showing off too. It's a complicated business. So how do you share detailed knowledge, out of which poetry comes, with an audience who don't know it? What do you do? Do you do footnotes? Do you do a little epigraph? Do you do footnotes at the end of the book? It's a big problem. And similarly with words, and you for instance, would you read something of yours? Because you have so much detailed knowledge which I don't have, and yet the poem flies above it.
I'll read a poem called Departures, which is dedicated to a friend and colleague called Ravi Agarwal, who is an activist, who's been an activist for decades, and is also a photographer and an artist. And increasingly, we've worked together on a project called State of Nature, and this poem emerged from, in the course of that experiment, really. So, Departures for Ravi Agarwal. What if the white mare, dragged down by a flabby bridegroom and underfed by her hungry sise, had the same name as the child ferrying bricks in her headpan at the kiln? What if the bat practicing a dive behind the shuttered windows of the natural history section could ask the elephant grazing in the parched scrubland her name, which would not be one of the brightly painted names of the god tucking his trunk in as his fans see him off at high tide, a departure viewed from the towers of silence by a tribe of scrawny vultures contemplating their journey's end? What if you tried to prize a password out of the stuffed orangutan the taxidermists have enthroned as a totem at the zoo? In all these names, you'd recognize the lost and forgotten seeds that a sleepy child dropped on the mossy ghats as the pilgrims from the stars, newly arrived, swept past one full moon night in vermilion and brocade. Who could have told them they would meet us again, stripped of our gaudy masks, our carrying voices muted, as skeletons on display in a distant planet's museum of cautionary tales?
Thank you for the elephant as well. He knows I'm writing a book about elephants. Yes, I was thinking also about maybe this moment of disintegration is an opportunity for us to take further the lyric tradition of reverence for the other, reverence for other species, reverence for other events. Shall I read the first poem in my book? I think you need a bit of humor as well, because otherwise, if you haven't got humor, what could you do? I'll just find this. And since these poems are very much trying to get at why people have denied climate change for so long. And last week I was in Kerala, and I was talking to somebody who was head of a radio station in Cochin. And he said, 20 years ago, I was wanting to make programs about it. Nobody wanted it. Now that everybody is worried about flooding, now they suddenly want it. This capacity of humans to deny what is worrying them, the elephant in the room. And so I found this exemplified in a newspaper story from Australia. Selfie with blue-ringed octopus. And it starts off this poem by the way that we ignore what we're worried about. Bad dreams ignored. Lit raindrops on windows of the midnight bus, and then a footstep behind you. Like the girl on a Sydney beach who picked up a tiny blue-ringed octopus, most dangerous creature in the sea, for a selfie. It rested in the cup of her hand, one small jelly spider, two legs folded under, as if it were on its knees, praying. So I didn't know about the blue-ringed octopus. Apparently it's about as big as this, and it's full of nerve toxins. I mean, that creature could have killed her like that, but she was using it for a selfie. And I think that sort of sums up. We have seen ourselves as center of the universe, and nature was our mirror. In this book, We're All From Somewhere Else, which is about migration, I talk about the broken mirror, the mirror of nature. We have deformed it, and by our selfiehood.
Absolutely. But also on the subject of migrations, I've found myself compelled by thinking not only about human migrations, which happen under pressure all the time. This is really a century of forced migrations. But we're also looking at animal migrations or animal incarcerations. And that has truly become a key focus for me to think about how our infrastructure projects, for instance, which treat nature as a blank page, are actually going right across elephant corridors. They go through domains which traditionally have been pertinent to tigers, leopards, all kinds of forms of animal life. So this throws up a whole set of juridical questions. I mean, and it strikes me that as a society, we have not even managed to secure a proper charter of human rights that can be enforced in every case. It's a brutally hierarchical, patriarchal caste society. But even so, in that kind of context, how does one think about animal rights? I'm thinking here of Peter Singer, who's the philosopher whose early work I found very influential as a student. How do you secure rights for animals who, by definition, cannot communicate their appeal or represent their predicament in some way? I think these are questions that will become more and more relevant to us as we go along. At this point, they sound a little like science fiction, but science fiction has a way of catching up and becoming reality before you know it. So this is a set of questions I've been preoccupied by. And I know you are thinking about this now in more recent work, your Minoan poems.
Yes. Well, I think about it all the time. I mean, I'm thinking about it too in my elephant book, of course, Elephant Corridors. But I was thinking something about purity. I was thinking also about purity, because water, to go back to water for a second, water has been our symbol of purity. You wash away your sins. And now it is the most contaminated thing on the planet. In doing these water poems, I looked up a map, a sort of 3D image of the globe, all dry, and all the water, all the fresh water in the whole globe is a tiny little, shall I read that poem? There's not that much water on the globe. There's a lot of surface water, but it doesn't go deep in the globe. And fresh water is something else. But let me listen to one of yours. All the world's fresh water. Here we are. All the world's fresh water in one bubble over Atlanta, Georgia. Groundwater, swamp water, rain gullies, rivers, ditches, and ponds. And that's it. A map of the only fresh water on the planet. Wind whips the lagoon into bubble froth, soap suds, and wet wipes blocking the drain. Your hands shake like rags in a gale before the eternal night of an exoplanet raining metal vapor and liquid gems. One side facing its own star, scorching in light, the other in infinite dark. You wait for the augury, sing to the brook, life flies out and away, a black bird shrieking alarm from a leafless branch. Well, that's a bit gloomy. But maybe you can light us up with something else from another. Ice Light, the title poem, Ice Light, which is really the most wonderful poem.
Ice light. Noctilucence, blue ice light dripping from a cloud. How to be the earth, maimed and gloried by that one stroke. In a cave, thawing in bearskins by fire glow, I carve wings and a beak in flame red stone, not hunting or hunted by. This one with a ridged mane and clawed arrows it will aim to declare nightfall and daybreak. This one that I will buff and never name.
See, I love that particularly because it's so much about making. And I think in talking about poetry of climate change, we have to talk about where hope is. And hope, is so much in the young and in what they can make. And I found one poem, I would call one poem just Hope is a Lamp Made of Water. Because this ingenious lot of people in Colombia, that is in the very north of Colombia, at the very north tip of the South American continent, there is a tribe who go fishing with little lamps made out of seawater. And just imagine that. If you could make electricity out of seawater, you wouldn't need to have coal mines, for instance. You wouldn't need to have anything that pollutes the atmosphere. You could just use seawater. And I thought, this is the most amazing, amazing invention. And the poem itself is in the shape of a lamp. Hope is a lamp made of water. Now you are leaving. Dip your hand in the sea. Scoop up the blue and green lozenges of all your past years. Electrolytes in a liter of salt water, gathered by the Wayu indigenous community on the remote La Guajira Peninsula, a desert surrounded by ocean, at the dangerous border between Colombia and Venezuela, who use salt water to light their night fishing. Electrical energy without needing to travel to find it. Power you don't have to buy from other people. A light source, new life running under this one. Pour everything in, hoping the magic will happen. Ionization will turn the raw mix into 1,000 days of light, an invention that might save the world, like your hand on my arm, skin on skin, one mind understanding another. So I think that is another key thing about poetry and climate change. You have to find the right balance and tone to think of it.
And also keep in mind how utterances that come from the ground of poetry make an appeal to a public consciousness that is conditioned by the media. I was just thinking in the last 10 days, one of the great news stories here was the great rescue of the miners who were trapped in that tunnel in the Himalayan foothills. But it was heroic, that rescue, there's no question of that. But I wonder if we tend to forget in celebrating that rescue that the only reason it happened is because we have been so irresponsible in what we've done with the hills. The absurd runaway building activity there, the complete refusal to recognize how fragile those ecosystems are, that is something we need to do. So how can our utterances make some kind of difference there? It's a vast and ambitious sort of idea, but I think that we could always retain some hope.
And I think also poetry is well addressed, well suited to address that hope, because we always deal with vulnerability. I mean, that's what poetry addresses, really, the vulnerability of the self, but we also have to address the vulnerability of the world, of nature, how fragile this wonderful, great, huge thing around us really is.
And we seem to have come down to the last 11 seconds of our time here. So, Ruth, I'm wondering if we could finish with a poem by you.
A little poem. Okay. This is a poem that's called, I think there's the vulnerable and there's also the possible. And we need to think about the possible. What is possible? So this is called Down Here, You're With the Possible. And I'm thinking about down here as the psyche, and down here as us with our backs against the wall, but also being together and thinking what we can make. Down here, you're with the possible. One more twitch of a forked twig, fathom testing the blind inner life. No time now for truth or dare, covering mirrors so we can't see spirits of the dead. We need the real thing, a clear view from on high, where we can stand above the loch, catch the flicker of a burn, reflecting emerald sky foam from aurora borealis, failing muscle of the Gulf Stream, and the 250 million year core of the Chakotaya Glacier, once the highest ski resort on Earth, now shingle and a fossil feather memory of ice.
Thank you so much, Ruth.